Hello and welcome to Faith in Action. This is the program that we want to convey the Christian faith in action, exactly as the name entitles. And today our program is taking a little different swing. We're having a personal testimony from a Christian businessman who is running a successful business, living a vibrant Christian faith, but it wasn't always that way. Some 27 years ago, Jerry was involved in a deep alcohol problem, had actually attempted to take his life on 2 occasions. And today he's going to walk us through the story of how he came through some very deep depression and recovered from that and has now celebrated 27 years of sobriety. Jerry, welcome to Faith in Action.
Thank you, Pastor.
Can I use your last name? You just prefer to go but just by first name?
Oh, whatever you like. Doesn't matter.
Okay. Jerry Peskett is our guest today. Jerry, we see you today with a vibrant Christian faith. You're active in our church at Central Pentecostal Church, singing in the choir, and lots of fun to be with. It wasn't always that way, Jerry. You tell me.
No, it wasn't.
Let's go back 27 plus years ago when you had suicide attempts and alcohol problems. Walk us through the journey, Jerry.
Yes. Well, it's a little difficult going back and reliving some of this stuff, but I believe that the Lord has spoke to me recently, and that sharing my experience may help someone in the community, especially in light of what's been happening in our community. Mm-hmm. It's really spoke to my heart about sharing this experience, that someone may benefit from it. Mm-hmm. And I know when it's all over, I will probably benefit from speaking about it as well. I was born and raised in Ottawa in '43, and what I thought was a normal family. There was alcoholism in the family, and I didn't really realize that as I was growing up that was in store for me, but to my surprise, that's exactly what happened. At 18 years old, I joined the Navy, the Canadian Navy, and I was introduced to alcohol very much so there. And when I first started with the alcohol, I didn't know that it would be a problem, but it quickly did become one.
How old would you be, do you remember, when you really started drinking heavy?
I was 18.
18?
Yeah.
At the early stages?
At the early stages. I drank before then, but it was never a problem.
Were your parents involved in a lot of alcohol?
Yes, they were, both of them. And I had always swore that I would never touch it if that's what it did to me. Mm-hmm. But alcohol is...
So you saw some devastating effects of alcohol in their lives?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And because of that, I thought that it would never bother me, because I didn't want anything to do with it if that was the end result. Mm-hmm. But the very first time that I drank alcohol, and I realized then what it did for me was an escape, immediate escape. Mm-hmm. And I realized then why they drank. It was their own escape as well. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So, after you got into the alcohol, at some point you realized that you were hooked on. I think that's still down the road a ways in the story, isn't it?
Yes.
You, I understand, got married along the journey there.
Yes.
Walk us through a little bit more there, where you actually had a suicide attempt.
Well, I was in the Navy for 3 years, and I met a gal while I was in the Navy down in Halifax. We lived together down there, and when I left and came back up to Ottawa, we got together again in Ottawa. We eventually did marry, and I suppose we both got married too young and for the wrong reasons. Again, maybe it was an escape. I don't know, looking back. But we had a troubled marriage. And one of the ways that I would escape the problems in our marriage was I would escape to alcohol. Mm. One of the ways that my first wife would escape she would run.
No, Jerry, you're using the word escape a lot, which is interesting to me, because the young people today almost consider it macho or cool to drink. Mm-hmm. You're saying that the opposite, really. That
Yes.
it's an escape. Maybe it's a show-off kind of thing. It's
Well,
not, not a very good sign of maturity if people have to escape in a drink.
well, I could relate it to smoking. Nobody starts out to have a cigarette or a drink saying, well, I'm just going to have one and then stop.
Yeah.
They're doing it because it's cool,
Yeah,
and especially with young people. And I was no different.
yeah.
But I very quickly came to the point where I realized early on that I was doing it to escape because
Is there a
I
cry
could be.
for acceptance in the back of all that too?
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I just wanted to be one of the boys, when I'm a young teenager and
Yeah.
be accepted.
Yeah,
And I got accepted for all the wrong reasons.
yeah. So your marriage was on rocky ground,
Yes.
and you're continuing to drink. What happened?
Well, at one point with the drinking, I knew that I was drinking too much and that it was affecting my life. I did not know that I was addicted at the time. And in fact, when I was in the Navy and I was asked to sign on again for another 3-year term, I declined at that point because I realized that I thought if I did a geographical cure and got out of the Navy and away from the guys that I were doing a lot of heavy drinking with, that I would be able to take it easy on the drinking, and it wouldn't be such a problem. But unbeknownst to me, I was the problem, and I took me with me, and when I got to Ottawa, the drinking continued. Now, when the marriage was going bad, and I was escaping through the alcohol, and my wife would leave me, she'd come back, she'd leave me again, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was slipping into depression. And I've been told since then it's very difficult to diagnose in yourself, but you could see it in others. And it was going over such a long period of time combined with the alcohol that I was becoming very sick.
So depression can really sort of sneak up on you slowly, it seems.
Yes, it happens in such small increments day to day that you don't notice it.
Yeah.
And that's why it's very important to be aware of those around us. I can easily spot it in someone else. When you don't see someone on a regular basis, if you only see them once a week or once a month or whatever, and you'll notice the change in them. And but it's difficult to see when it's happening to you because of the small increments that it's happening in.
This past summer, Jerry, two young people in our community, as we all know, took their lives. Is it possible that when you're living with a person, you also don't see it the same? It seems to sneak up on families, and we're not always aware that this person's going through.
Absolutely. A lot of it is denial. We would just hate to think that this is happening to someone that we love, someone that's close to us. There are small signs to watch for with depression, and I've learned over the years to be aware of these things because it can come back on anyone at any given time. But one of the first signs that I know is that if you just don't want to get out of bed, if you can't get an early start on life, and you don't want to face the day, and the first sign of depression, especially with me, is I just want to pull the covers over my head and stay in bed.
Wow. Now, that depression led to a suicide attempt.
Yes, it did. My wife had left me, and I was alone for weeks, 5-6 weeks. And I was doing more drinking and being more depressed, and I didn't realize it. And then one day I just woke up and I said, well, what's the point? I couldn't see myself living without this person in my life. I had my life all wrapped around that person. And since she wasn't in my life, I thought, well, I just can't go on. And it was very painful. And to me, the pain of exiting this earth was going to be a lot less than actually having to face life, because I just didn't want to go on. I had nothing to live for, I felt.
What did you actually do?
Well, I took a razor blade and I slit my wrist.
Wow.
I ended up in this happened in Hamilton, and I ended up in the St. Joseph's Hospital where they were stitching me up. And
So you were obviously found.
yes, God's miracle was working in my life long before I'd given my heart to the Lord. And that was one of the times. My wife had a girlfriend living next door, and they'd been on vacation and didn't know about that my wife had left. So they used to walk in each other's door all the time, and this girl walked in and found me on the floor and called the medics.
Were you unconscious?
Yes, I was.
Wow.
I ended up being stitched up at St. Joseph's Hospital, and then I was committed, actually, because I refused to voluntarily go into the Ontario Hospital up in Hamilton. And I was 7 weeks there.
7 weeks?
7 weeks in the Ontario Hospital, a psychiatric unit
Wow.
in Hamilton.
Was that helpful, Jerry?
Well, yes and no. You saw a doctor for about 20 minutes once a week, and mostly they just kept you medicated and kept you under control. But where I did get benefit from it was we had group therapy, and it was very hard for me to open up. But there's 10 or 12 people sitting around in a group and talking about how they got there, and I started to realize that I was so focused on me and my own little world that there were people out there that were really hurting. And I started to feel that I didn't have any problems at all compared to these poor people. And when I got involved in their stories and in their lives, I forgot about myself, and I started to slowly come out of it.
As a pastor, I always struggle with the idea of how can we help people to open up. We're so surfacey in our life, and we don't really let other people see the soul, the inner part. I think to our own harm, because the Bible says, for example, confess your faults one to another that you may be healed.
Yes.
We understand we confess our sins to God, but our faults, our weaknesses, there's a real principle of talking to one another about problems, and that group therapy did that for you. Just to talk to people is helpful.
It is.
And that's why people that go through struggles, we had a forum back in our church back in September where we tried to encourage young people to do that, to talk. Jerry, why don't we talk to each other more? I don't mean just you and I, but people as a whole. We're afraid to open up. Maybe because we don't trust each other, afraid that somebody will run with the gossip or whatever.
Yes, I think it's part of our human nature that we don't want to open up. You can call it pride. There's many reasons that we don't, but people find it difficult. I find it very difficult today to come and do this, but I know that my experience may benefit someone.
How did that group in the hospital build a sense of trust so that you and others would open up and tell their story and say, hey, I'm hurting?
Well, I suppose there's an anonymity to it. You are realizing that these are people that you don't know their background, their history, and they're going to let you into their lives, as I did, very slowly, little increments at a time. And also that there is an anonymous part of it, because you're going to get out of there one day and you're going to go your own ways and probably never see each other again. So that helps.
Now, you came through that suicide attempt, came out of the hospital after 7 weeks. Group therapy helped some.
Yes.
Did you go back to drinking again?
Oh, yes, I went back to drinking, not realizing that the drinking had played a major part in my depression. Alcohol is actually a depressant, and although temporarily it will give you a lift, it will give you clinical depression if you stay at it.
More marriage problems as well?
Yes, the marriage problems continued because we weren't doing anything to alleviate it, and my alcoholism wasn't helping the matters at all.
You told me earlier this led to a second suicide attempt.
Yes, at another time my wife had left me, and I went into despair and not knowing what to do. I had no direction in my life whatsoever, and I had gone down to the East Coast to try to get her back again for the umpteenth time. And I ended up, again in my despair, I parked my car at the end of the Angus L. MacDonald Bridge, and I walked up, and I climbed over the girders, and I was scampering around on girders on I-beams underneath the bridge, and steeling myself for the inevitable. I just wanted to end it all. Again,
you were
the
getting
Lord
ready to
moved
jump?
into. Yes, I was getting ready to jump.
There's a fairly high bridge
Yes,
down the Maritime somewhere.
Yes, from Halifax to Dartmouth.
Wow.
And the irony of it is, when I was in the Navy, I was on a ship that docked at Jetty 4 right below it, and I had never thought or envisioned myself, down the road that one day I'd be up there as a jumper.
You're in a state of depression and
Very
a
much
state
so.
of despair. And
Yes, very much so. And again, the Lord was moving in my life, because I suppose someone had seen me climbing over and they stopped the traffic, but in a short while there was a man there, a Salvation Army chap, and he was speaking to me, and I guess we talked for about 20 minutes.
I think you had mentioned also that there was somebody down below that was actually shouting at you to jump.
Yes, there was a man in the Navy on a ship, and he was telling me that I should jump and go ahead and do it and all this, and it just it boggles my mind to think about it now, but
Yeah.
I got closer to doing it. That was the closest point.
Yeah.
When he did that, I had the attitude, well, I'll show you,
Yeah. I want to come back to the Salvation Army officer in a moment, but one of the words that we heard a great deal when we had our forum back in September was the word hopelessness.
Yes, yes. Oh, I was...
People lose hope.
Yes, absolutely.
Can't see any future.
That's right. Everything is just so dark and black, and I had no joy in my life, and I couldn't foresee ever having any. I just had my life all wrapped around this particular person, and with this person not in my life, I thought there was no use going on.
Yeah. Well, so you're on the girder under this bridge, contemplating jumping, and by coincidence, we believe more than that, don't we?
Well, yes, we do.
But by coincidence, a Salvation Army officer is on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Must have got out of his vehicle.
Yes.
Somebody had stopped the traffic.
Yes.
And the Salvation Army comes and talks to you.
I can't even remember specifically what it was he said, but there was something...
He must have climbed over somehow.
Well, no, he was leaning over and speaking to me in that manner. And I can't even remember what he said at this time, but I remember there was a little glimmer of hope in what he had said.
Mm-hmm.
And then came a point where I knew the will to live became stronger than the will to die.
Mm.
And I wanted to get out of that precarious situation. And then I just froze.
Yeah.
I couldn't, 20 minutes before I'm scurrying around like a squirrel in a tree, and then all of a sudden when the will to live kicked in, I was frozen on that girder, and I had to be inched up, talked up an inch at a time.
Wow.
And to this day, I have a fear of heights because of that, but...
kind of an interesting
yes,
reminder
it certainly is.
Of that day.
Yeah.
That's remarkable. You're one of the blessed ones, fortunate ones that survived two suicide attempts.
Yes.
There are families who have not been so fortunate that have lost loved ones to this tragedy.
I think one of the important things that come out of this for me that I really must express is the despair that I felt at the time, and I wanted out of this world so badly because it was so painful to be in it. Mm. And the way that my life has been turned around now, I really look at each day from that day until this as bonus, because I should not, by all rights, be here today.
Yeah.
And I have had so much joy and happiness from that day till this that it's just unbelievable. It's like two different people in two different worlds.
What happened, Jerry, that turned the tide for you?
Well, one of the first things that happened after I got off the bridge, I was taken by police to a psychiatric unit in the hospital in Halifax. And again, I was 7 weeks in there. Through that, I was interviewed. I can recall one of the workers in there, the therapist, she said, Jerry, we're going to give you a series of tests, the ink blot tests and the tests that show you your IQ, et cetera, et cetera. And this lady, after all of these tests, said to me, Jerry, she says, you have the ability to be anything that you want to be and to do anything that you want to do, but you suffer from a low self-esteem. And it sort of, a light went off, and I realized all through my life I'd been like that. And again, I wore so many masks in my alcoholism that the reason I liked the feeling of oblivion when I was drinking was because I could be whoever I wanted to be or do whatever I wanted to do. And here was someone, a therapist, that was telling me I actually could do it. I gave me a little glimmer of hope. And I always remembered that when I left there. And I started to apply myself more after I left there.
So somebody else saw potential in you.
Yes.
And told you that.
Yes.
And that gave you a spark of hope.
That's right.
That's an important point, isn't it?
Yes, very important.
We need to affirm each other in this world.
Absolutely.
To give encouragement to each other.
And it was a very small spark, but it grew.
Now, we've obviously met before, so I know a little bit of your story here. So you told me that you got invited into a 12-step program. Tell us a little bit about that, how that sort of got you turning around in this alcohol business.
Well, I was working in Oakville at the time, and a chap had started to work there who had had a really rough life, and he was involved in alcohol, and he ended up going to a 12-step program. And he could see me coming into work hungover or sometimes drinking on the job, and he could see himself in me. And he started to talk to me about it, and he was actually bugging me about it. And I finally got to the point where I said, look, if you get off my back, I'll go to one of these meetings with you.
Yeah.
So I did. I went to one of the meetings with him, and he didn't get off my back, thank God. Mm-hmm. Well, I can't remember what was said or done at that meeting, but I remember there getting a glimmer of hope as well. And I realized that a lot of these people, they're just like you or I. I mean, you wouldn't know them. If you saw them sober, you wouldn't know that they were alcoholic. I always had envisioned that an alcoholic, you know, the army coat, a bottle of wine sticking out of the back pocket in a brown paper bag, and it's nothing like that at all.
No.
A small, perhaps 5% of the alcoholic population are what they call the low-bottom drunk. But there are many people behind curtains.
Three-piece suits.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that need help. So you got going to the meeting, heard testimony, no doubt, of other people who are getting help.
That's right.
It, again, gave you a spark of hope.
That's right.
Jerry, what you're doing right now, giving testimony, is my prayer that it's going to spark some hope in somebody that's listening out here today.
Well, this was the major reason that I stuck with this. I got a little bit of hope at that first meeting, and I thought, well, I'm going to go back to another one and see, and another one and another one, and it started to grow. The hope started to grow, and the testimonies that I was hearing, I couldn't believe some of these things. I was identifying with a lot of these things that these men and women had gone through, and I started to realize that I'm not unique in this situation. You see, I'd always thought that the situation that I was in was unique to me.
Yeah.
And it just became so much smaller when I realized that there's a number of people out there that are going through exactly the same situation as I am.
So here again, the Word of God says, confess your faults one to another, you may be healed. And testimony is really a form of confessing our faults, sharing our story. And God says there's healing that takes place.
Yes.
I'm trusting that there will be some healing take place in people's lives, even as we talk. And this is seen in local cable here in Laura Fergus, because hopelessness is an awful thing. It just, well, I'm telling you, you've been there. Jerry, along the way now, the 12-step program helped you. Somebody invited you to a different kind of meeting. Tell us about that.
Yes, I'd come up into this area because I was living in Burlington at the time, and I got into aviation. I flew a small aircraft, and I wanted to get a place out in the country where I could get a strip. So I ran into a friend, it became a friend, but I was flying around one day, and I saw an airstrip, and I went down, and I spoke to the man and about how do you get an airstrip started. And we became friends, and over a few weeks, I dropped in a few times, and I happened to tell him that I'd been to a meeting and heard a wonderful speaker. And he said, boy, if you want to hear a good speaker, he says, come with me on Saturday. So I said, sure. I went home and I said to my wife, I said, I think I just got myself into one of those religious things, you know. And
I think we should interject here that your first wife that you eventually divorced,
Yes,
and
yes.
since remarried.
That's correct.
And now it's a second wife, Anne,
Yes.
who you're telling, I think I got myself into something religious here.
I think so. And I guess the program I was in, the 12-step program, had taught me to keep an open mind, and so I tried very much to keep an open mind, and I ended up going with my wife to this meeting with my friend Chris. Well, it was a man called Ernie Hollins, and well known in Christian circles, and he was by the way, it was a full gospel businessmen's fellowship meeting up in Arthur, and this Ernie Hollins had been a well-known Canadian bank robber, and he was telling his testimony, and boy, I was really, really fascinated by it. And anyways, after that meeting, I got a lot of hope. And he spoke about how the Lord had moved in wonderful ways in his life. Mm-hmm. And he was going around the countryside giving his testimony and reaching many, many people. And many people had given their heart to the Lord through this. Mm-hmm. I went home with lots of food for thought. And a month later, I went back to the next meeting. It was at that meeting that I gave my heart to the Lord. The Lord moved in on me in a mighty way. I just had the infilling of the Holy Spirit, and instantly
Marvelous.
Felt like a different person. And the irony of it is, I'd been a number of years going to this 12-step program, and it's a very spiritual program, and I felt growth. But I had always, for a number of years, I felt that there had been something missing, that there must be more to it than this. Mm-hmm. And the day that I gave my heart to the Lord, I instantly knew that this is what I'd been searching for without knowing it.
Fabulous. Mm. What a marvelous story we've heard today from Jerry Peskett, a local area businessman. And Jerry has now enjoyed sobriety for 27 years plus. A remarkable story of the grace of God. He got help, first of all, through somebody affirming him, just giving him a spark of hope, seeing potential in him. Mm-hmm. Got in some group therapy, which is another way of just sharing with a group of people, opening up and talking about the problem. Got into a 12-step program that he heard testimonies of other people who had got help that gave him hope. Jerry still goes to those meetings. He wants to continue for his own benefit and the help of others who are still interested in that kind of help. He also opened his heart to the Lord Jesus, who became his ultimate source of help. There is hope. If you're going through some difficulty today, if we can be of some help to you, if you'd like to talk to Jerry sometime, I think I could arrange that for you. And let me give you our church phone number, 846-0272. God bless you. Thanks for listening, and keep the faith.
Yes.